Unaware his wife was the secret billionaire CEO who owned the airline company his entire family worked for, Ethan Mercer felt victorious as he hurriedly signed the divorce papers while his mother poured red wine on her dress at the company banquet. For 3 years, he had treated his wife, Ava, like she was ordinary, a quiet woman, a nobody, someone who contributed little while he climbed the corporate ladder at the airline company that supported not only him but his entire family. What Ethan never knew was that the airline he proudly worked for wasn't owned by distant investors. It belonged to Ava. She was the secret billionaire CEO, and she had hidden her identity from everyone. The final humiliation came during the company's annual banquet. As executives, managers, and employees filled the luxurious ballroom, Ethan arrived with the woman he intended to replace his wife with. His mother stood proudly beside him, eager to celebrate the divorce she had pushed for from the very beginning. When Ava appeared in a simple but elegant dress, Ethan's mother smirked with disgust. Then, in front of hundreds of guests, she lifted a glass of red wine and deliberately poured it all over Ava's dress. The room gasped. Red wine dripped from the fabric onto the polished floor. Ethan didn't stop her. His new lover laughed. His mother smiled. And Ethan simply watched. What none of them realized was that the board meeting scheduled for the next morning would change everything. Because the woman standing there in silence wasn't a powerless ex-wife. She was the unseen owner of the entire airline empire. The woman they had humiliated. The woman whose signature could end careers with a single stroke of a pen. And when Ava walked into the boardroom and finally took control of her company, what she revealed was so shocking, so devastating, that Ethan, his mother, and everyone who had betrayed her would soon lose everything they thought they owned. Their destruction had just begun. The ballroom remained silent long after the wine hit Ava's dress. Drops of crimson slid down the pale fabric like wounds spreading across untouched skin. No one moved. No one spoke. Ava lowered her eyes and calmly looked at the stain. For a brief moment, Ethan almost felt uncomfortable. Almost. Then he reminded himself that none of this mattered anymore. The divorce papers had already been signed. Their marriage was over. His future was standing beside him in the form of Vanessa Hart, a glamorous marketing executive who never failed to remind him how much greater his life could be without Ava holding him back. Vanessa wrapped an arm around his shoulder and smirked. Maybe now she'll finally understand she doesn't belong here. Several guests exchanged nervous glances. Something about Ava's reaction felt strange. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even embarrassed. Instead, she lifted her gaze and slowly looked around the ballroom. One by one, as if memorizing every face, as if recording every expression, as if silently deciding who would remain and who would disappear. The thought vanished from Ethan's mind as quickly as it appeared. Ava had always been quiet. That was one of the things his mother hated most about her. Margaret Mercer stepped forward proudly. You should leave before you embarrass yourself further. The words echoed through the ballroom. Ava stared at her former mother-in-law for several seconds. Then she smiled. Not a hurt smile. Not a defeated smile. A knowing smile. The kind of smile people wear when they already know the ending of a story everyone else is still living. Margaret frowned. The expression unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Years earlier, when Ethan first introduced Ava to the family, Margaret had immediately disliked her. Ava arrived wearing modest clothing and driving an old sedan. She never mentioned influential relatives. Never spoke about wealth. never tried to impress anyone. Margaret assumed she came from nothing. She spent years reminding Ava of that assumption. Years criticizing her. Years convincing Ethan that he deserved someone more ambitious. What Margaret never knew was that Ava's father had warned her before the wedding. People reveal themselves when they believe you need them more than they need you. At the time, Ava thought he was being overly cautious. Tonight those words returned with perfect clarity. The banquet lights reflected against the wine stain. For a moment, it looked almost like blood. An old scar reopened. A silent warning. A debt waiting to be collected. Ava turned toward the exit. Before leaving, she looked back once. Her eyes settled on Ethan. No anger. No hatred. Only disappointment. That expression disturbed him more than tears ever could. Then she walked away. Across the ballroom. Past the executives. Past the managers. Past the employees who whispered behind her back. The large doors closed. The sound echoed through the room. Somewhere high above the city, a private office remained illuminated inside the airline's headquarters. A sealed folder sat on a polished desk. Inside were documents that could destroy careers. Documents carrying names, signatures, financial records, evidence, and at the very top of the stack sat one name: Ethan Mercer. The board meeting would begin in less than 12 hours. And for the first time in years, Ava was done protecting people from the consequences of their own actions. The following morning, Ethan woke with a sense of relief he had not felt in years. For the first time since marrying Ava, he believed his life was finally moving in the direction he deserved. The divorce was finished. Vanessa had spent half the night talking about their future together. His mother had repeatedly told him he had made the right choice. Everything seemed perfect. Yet as he drove toward the airline headquarters, a strange feeling settled in his stomach. The sky above the city was gray. Heavy clouds drifted over the glass towers downtown. The weather forecast predicted clear skies, but somehow the morning felt like the beginning of a storm. When Ethan arrived at the building, he noticed something unusual. Luxury vehicles lined the entrance. More security personnel stood outside than normal. Several senior executives were entering through a private access point, usually reserved for board members. He frowned. The annual board meeting wasn't scheduled for another month. Why was everyone gathering today? Inside the elevator, employees whispered nervously. Ethan caught fragments of conversation. "Did you hear? Nobody knew. This changes everything." The moment they noticed him listening, they became silent. His uneasiness deepened. By the time he reached his office, he found an email waiting in his inbox. Mandatory attendance. Executive boardroom. 10:00 a.m. No explanation. No agenda. Only a company seal attached to the bottom. Ethan stared at the message. Something felt wrong. Across the city, Ava stood inside a private penthouse suite overlooking the skyline. Unlike the previous evening, there was no trace of humiliation on her face. The wine-stained dress had been carefully preserved and placed inside a garment bag. Evidence. A reminder. A symbol of everything that had happened. A woman entered the room carrying several documents. "Everything is ready, Ms. Carter." Ava nodded. For years, only a handful of people knew her true identity. The public believed the airline was controlled by a trust. Executives believed anonymous investors owned the majority shares. Even the board only communicated with her through legal representatives. It had been a deliberate arrangement created by her late father. He had built the company from nothing. Then he had spent decades watching greed corrupt people around him. Before his death, he gave Ava one final lesson. Never reveal power too early. At the time, she didn't fully understand. Now she did. Because the people who claimed to value loyalty had revealed exactly who they were when they believed she was powerless. Especially Ethan. Ava remembered their first meeting years ago. He had been charming then. Ambitious. Kind. Or at least he appeared to be. Back then, he talked about building a future together. About family. About trust. She had fallen in love with the man he pretended to be. But success changed him. Every promotion made him more arrogant. Every compliment from executives inflated his ego. And eventually, Vanessa appeared. After that, everything deteriorated. Ava looked toward the city below. Thousands of employees depended on the company. Many were hardworking people who deserved leadership. They deserved honesty. Not corruption. Not favoritism. Not executives abusing authority. The boardroom clock would strike 10 in less than an hour. And when it did, masks would begin falling. One after another. Meanwhile, Ethan entered the executive boardroom. The atmosphere immediately felt strange. The room was packed. Senior managers sat silently. Board members occupied their seats. Legal advisors stood along the walls. No one seemed relaxed. No one seemed willing to speak. At the far end of the room sat a chair Ethan had never seen occupied before. The chairman's seat. The seat reserved for the majority owner. The mysterious figure no employee had ever met. Ethan glanced at it briefly before taking his place. A cold feeling crawled down his spine. For reasons he couldn't explain, he suddenly remembered Ava's smile at the banquet. That calm smile. That knowing smile. The smile of someone who already knew how the story would end. 10 o'clock arrived. The boardroom doors opened. And every person in the room turned toward the entrance. The boardroom doors swung open with quiet authority. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Ava walked into the room. Not as the woman he had divorced. Not as the quiet wife he had spent years underestimating. She entered surrounded by legal advisors, senior board representatives, and members of the executive leadership team. The room immediately rose to its feet. Every single person. Except Ethan. He remained frozen in his chair. Confusion flashed across his face. Then disbelief. Then something much darker. Fear. Ava moved calmly toward the head of the long conference table. Toward the chairman's seat. Toward the chair that no one except the majority owner had the authority to occupy. No, Ethan whispered. The word escaped before he realized he had spoken. Ava sat down. The room remained standing. One of the attorneys cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Ava Carter, majority shareholder, owner, and chief executive officer of Carter Global Airways. The silence that followed felt endless. Several executives lowered their eyes. Others watched Ethan carefully. Everyone knew what was happening. Everyone except him. His face turned pale. "This is a mistake," he said. No one responded. "It has to be." The attorney calmly slid several documents across the table. Certified ownership records. corporate filings, board resolutions, legal confirmations. Every page carried Ava's name. Every page proved the same thing. The airline belonged to her. It always had. The realization hit Ethan like a train. 3 years. For 3 years, he had worked inside her company. 3 years of arrogance. 3 years of disrespect. 3 years of believing he was climbing toward power, when in reality he had been standing beneath it the entire time. Ava's expression remained unreadable. I assume everyone is wondering why this meeting was called. Nobody answered. Nobody dared. Outside the windows, dark clouds gathered over the city. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Ava opened a folder. The same folder that had been waiting in the private office the night before. The room grew noticeably colder. Before discussing the future of this company, she said, we must address certain actions that have damaged it. A screen illuminated behind her. A financial report appeared. Then another. Then another. The atmosphere changed instantly. Executives shifted nervously. Several board members exchanged worried looks. The documents revealed unauthorized spending, questionable contracts, improper hiring decisions, abuse of company resources. Months of investigations condensed into a few devastating slides. Ava had been watching everything. Quietly, patiently, collecting evidence. Ethan felt sweat forming on his forehead. His confidence from earlier that morning had completely vanished. The woman he thought he knew was gone. Or perhaps she had never existed at all. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Years earlier, during their first anniversary, Ava had asked him a simple question. What matters more, power or character? At the time, he laughed. Power creates character. She had looked disappointed by the answer. He understood why now. Because power hadn't revealed strength in him. It had revealed weakness. Across the table, one executive attempted to interrupt. Ms. Carter, perhaps these issues should be handled privately. Ava's gaze shifted toward him. The man immediately fell silent. The confidence disappeared from his face. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The authority she carried was overwhelming. The kind that came from certainty. The kind that came from knowing exactly who she was. And exactly what she intended to do. Ava opened another folder. This one thinner, more personal. Her eyes settled on Ethan. For the first time since entering the room, a chill ran through his body. Because he recognized that look. Not from yesterday. Not from the divorce. But from years ago. Whenever Ava finally reached a decision, she never changed her mind. And judging by her expression, she had already decided his future. Ethan Mercer, she said calmly. The sound of his name echoed through the room. He swallowed hard. Ava slid several documents onto the table. Let's discuss your role in all of this. The color drained from his face. Because his name appeared on every page. Contracts, approvals, financial authorizations, internal communications, evidence, page after page after page. And suddenly, Ethan realized something horrifying. This meeting wasn't about company restructuring. It wasn't about ownership. It wasn't even about leadership. It was about accountability. And he was sitting at the center of the storm. The storm he had spent years creating without realizing who controlled the weather. Ava closed the folder slowly. Then she looked around the boardroom. Today, she said, the truth finally becomes public. And for the first time in years, Ethan Mercer understood what it felt like to be completely powerless. Ethan sat motionless as the weight of Ava's words settled over the room. For years, he had enjoyed being the person asking questions. The person making decisions. The person others feared disappointing. Now he was the one under scrutiny. And there was nowhere to hide. Ava pressed a button on the conference table. A series of emails appeared on the large screen. The first few seemed harmless. Then the details became impossible to ignore. Unauthorized approvals. Private discussions regarding promotions. Messages recommending friends and family members for positions they were not qualified to hold. Each document carried timestamps, signatures, records, proof. The deeper the presentation went, the more uncomfortable the room became. Ethan's stomach twisted. He recognized every email. At the time, they had seemed insignificant. Small favors, minor shortcuts, nothing serious. At least that was what he had told himself. Now they looked very different. Now they looked like evidence. Across the room, several executives avoided eye contact. Others silently reviewed copies of the documents placed before them. No one came to Ethan's defense. No one challenged Ava. The silence was louder than any accusation. A flashback surfaced in Ethan's mind. 2 years earlier, Ava had gently warned him during dinner. Be careful who you become while chasing success. He remembered laughing. You're worried too much. Back then, he believed ambition justified everything. Today, those words felt less like advice and more like a prophecy. Ava continued calmly. Our internal investigation lasted 18 months. The room shifted. 18 months. That meant she had begun investigating long before the divorce. Long before the banquet. Long before Vanessa. She had already seen what was happening. She had already known. Ethan felt his pulse racing. How much had she discovered? The answer arrived moments later. Far more than he expected. Another report appeared. This one focused on executive misconduct. Several names immediately stood out. Managers who had manipulated hiring processes. Department heads who had approved questionable contracts. Senior employees who had used company resources for personal benefit. One by one, their faces turned pale. One by one, they realized they were not merely witnesses. They were participants. And Ava had receipts for all of it. Outside the boardroom windows, rain began striking the glass. The sound created an eerie rhythm against the growing tension. Ava noticed it. For a brief second, her eyes drifted toward the storm. The image reminded her of the wine running down her dress the previous evening. The humiliation. The laughter. The smug expressions. The certainty that she would remain silent. A small part of her had been hurt. Not because of the wine. Not because of the public embarrassment. But because she finally understood that the people she had protected never valued her at all. They valued only what they believed she could provide. The moment they thought she had nothing, their cruelty surfaced. The realization had hurt more than the betrayal itself. Back in the present, Ava returned her attention to the board. Several individuals will be terminated effective immediately. The announcement struck like lightning. Gasps spread throughout the room. One executive stood abruptly. You can't do this. Ava looked at him. The man immediately regretted speaking. Actually, one attorney replied, she can. The legal team distributed additional paperwork. Termination notices. Board resolutions. Asset reviews. Compliance findings. Everything had already been prepared. This wasn't a discussion. It was the execution of a decision. A decision made long before anyone entered the room. Ethan stared at the stack of papers in front of him. His hands trembled. For the first time, he noticed his name listed among those facing disciplinary action. His throat tightened. No, he whispered. The word barely escaped his lips. He looked toward several colleagues, people he once considered allies. None met his gaze. None offered support. Each person was too busy worrying about their own future. And suddenly, Ethan understood something Ava had realized years ago. Loyalty built on convenience disappears the moment consequences arrive. The room that once made him feel powerful now felt like a prison. Meanwhile, hundreds of employees throughout the headquarters were beginning to hear rumors. Whispers spread through hallways. Phone calls circulated between departments. The mysterious owner had appeared. Executives were being removed. The company was changing. No one knew the full story yet. But everyone sensed something historic was happening. Back inside the boardroom, Ava stood from the chairman's seat. The movement instantly commanded attention. The room became silent once more. Her voice remained calm, measured, controlled. But there was steel beneath every word. This company was built on integrity. She paused. My father sacrificed everything to create it. Another pause. And I will not allow anyone to destroy what generations worked to build. No one challenged her. No one could. Because everyone could now see the truth. The quiet woman they had underestimated for years had never been weak. She had simply been patient. And patience, when combined with power, was proving far more dangerous than anger. Then Ava opened the final folder. The one she had not yet revealed. The one connected directly to Ethan. And the moment she looked at him, he knew the worst was still coming. The final folder rested on the polished table like a loaded weapon. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The rain outside intensified, streaking the glass walls of the boardroom and casting gray shadows across the faces of everyone present. Ethan could not stop staring at the folder. Something deep inside him was screaming that whatever was inside would change everything. Ava slowly opened it. The sound of the pages turning seemed unnaturally loud. Then she looked directly at Ethan. You may be wondering why your file is separate from the others. His mouth felt dry. Ava. She raised a hand. The single gesture silenced him. Not because of authority. Because of certainty. The certainty that she already knew every excuse he was about to make. Every lie. Every justification. Every attempt to shift blame. The screen behind her changed. A new series of documents appeared. This time the issue wasn't company misconduct. It was something far more personal. Ethan's private communications. Messages. Recorded meetings. Correspondence with Vanessa. The room immediately grew tense. Several board members looked uncomfortable. Others looked shocked. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Because he recognized the dates. Many of those messages had been exchanged while he was still married. Before the divorce. before he openly introduced Vanessa as his new partner. The evidence was undeniable. Months of deception, months of dishonesty, months of planning a future with another woman while pretending his marriage still mattered. One board member removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. Another shook his head in disappointment. The scandal was no longer professional. It was deeply personal. Ava remained calm. Normally, she said, an employee's personal life would not concern this company. Ethan felt a tiny spark of hope. Then she continued. However, when company resources are used to support that behavior, it becomes a corporate issue. The hope vanished. Additional records appeared. Travel expenses, unauthorized reimbursements, luxury accommodations, corporate accounts used to fund personal activities. Every transaction had been tracked. Every expense documented. The legal team distributed more copies. The room became deathly silent. Vanessa's name appeared repeatedly. Again and again. Ethan lowered his head. For the first time, genuine panic began replacing denial. Years ago, he had convinced himself that small abuses didn't matter. Everyone did it. Everyone bent rules. Everyone used connections. That was how business worked. Or so he believed. Now those same choices were being projected onto a giant screen in front of the most powerful people in the company. And suddenly, they didn't seem small anymore. They seemed catastrophic. Ava watched him quietly. She remembered another night years earlier. A simple dinner at home. Ethan had been frustrated because he wasn't promoted quickly enough. He spent hours complaining about executives, about leadership, about favoritism. At one point, he slammed his hand against the table. If I ever get real authority, I'll do things differently. Ava had believed him. Back then, she truly believed him. The memory hurt. Not because of what he had become. Because of the man she once thought he was. The man she loved. That version of Ethan seemed like a stranger now. Across town, Margaret Mercer sat comfortably in her living room, completely unaware of what was happening. She was speaking with friends on the phone, boasting about Ethan's future, mocking Ava, celebrating the divorce. She had no idea that the foundation beneath her family was already collapsing. No idea that her son's career was hanging by a thread. No idea that within hours, her own position at the company would come under review. The storm was approaching, and she was standing directly in its path. Back in the boardroom, Ava closed the file. Ethan Mercer. The sound of his name felt heavier this time. He slowly looked up. His confidence was gone. His arrogance had disappeared. Only fear remained. Ava took a deep breath. For a brief moment, sadness crossed her face. Not anger. Not revenge. Sadness. Because despite everything, there had been a time when she wanted this man to succeed. A time when she imagined growing old with him. Building a family together. Sharing a future. Now all that remained were consequences. You were given opportunities others would have sacrificed everything for. Her voice remained steady. You were trusted. Each word landed harder than the last. You were protected. Another pause. And you chose greed. Ethan lowered his eyes. The truth hurt because he could no longer deny it. The board members exchanged glances. They already knew what was coming. The evidence was overwhelming. The outcome unavoidable. Ava looked toward the legal team. One attorney nodded. Everything was prepared. Everything was finalized. The recommendation was ready for immediate implementation. Ava returned her attention to Ethan. Then she delivered the sentence that shattered the last piece of hope he still possessed. Effective immediately, your employment with Carter Global Airways is terminated. The room went silent. Completely silent. Ethan stared at her. Unable to breathe. Unable to think. Unable to process what he had just heard. His career. His reputation. His future. Gone. In a single sentence. But as devastating as the announcement felt, Ava knew something Ethan did not. Losing his job would soon become the least of his problems. Because the next revelations wouldn't just affect him. They would affect his mother, Vanessa, and every member of the Mercer family who had built their lives on privileges they never earned. And once those truths became public, there would be no way back. Ethan sat frozen as the words echoed through his mind. Effective immediately, your employment with Carter Global Airways is terminated. The sentence seemed impossible. Just yesterday, he had imagined himself climbing higher within the company. Yesterday, he believed he was finally escaping Ava and stepping into a better future. Now everything had collapsed. And the worst part was that the collapse had happened in front of everyone. Every executive, every board member, every person whose respect he once desperately wanted. The room felt smaller with every passing second. The legal team gathered documents while board members quietly discussed next steps. No one looked sympathetic. No one looked surprised. Most looked relieved, as though a burden they had tolerated for years had finally been removed. Ava remained standing at the head of the table. Calm, composed, untouchable. The contrast between them could not have been greater. One was losing everything. The other was reclaiming what had always belonged to her. Then another attorney rose from his chair. Before we conclude, there is an additional matter requiring immediate review. The atmosphere shifted again. Ethan's stomach dropped. Additional matter. He glanced around the room. Several board members opened new folders. Others adjusted their glasses and began reading. Ava said nothing. She simply watched. The attorney continued. The review concerns improper employment practices involving multiple members of the Mercer family. A sharp silence followed. Ethan's blood ran cold. His family. The words struck harder than his termination. His mother. His cousin. His uncle. Several relatives worked for the airline. Most had obtained their positions through Ethan's influence. At the time, he justified it as helping family. Now those decisions were returning with consequences. The screen changed again. Names appeared. Job titles. Hiring records. Performance evaluations. Internal complaints. Several positions had bypassed normal recruitment procedures. Others involved clear conflicts of interest. The evidence was overwhelming. One board member shook his head. Another quietly sighed. The pattern was obvious. Favoritism. Nepotism. Abuse of influence. Everything Ava had spent months documenting. Miles away, Margaret Mercer was still enjoying her afternoon. She had invited Vanessa to lunch. The two women sat inside an upscale restaurant, laughing over coffee. Margaret couldn't hide her satisfaction. I told Ethan years ago he deserved someone better. Vanessa smiled. Now he finally has me. The women laughed. Neither noticed the television mounted above the restaurant bar. Neither noticed the breaking business report beginning to appear on financial news channels. Neither noticed the first signs of disaster approaching. Back in the boardroom, Ava slowly walked toward the large windows. Rain continued striking the glass. The city below looked blurred beneath the storm. She remembered standing in that same building years earlier with her father. She had been barely 22. The company was expanding rapidly. Investors wanted publicity. Journalists wanted interviews. Her father refused. The company should be known for its work, not its owner. At the time, she questioned the decision. Now she understood. Secrecy had revealed people's true character, especially Ethan's. If he had known who she was from the beginning, would he have treated her differently? Almost certainly. Would his mother have poured wine on her dress? Never. Would Vanessa have mocked her? Not a chance. The realization was painful, because it meant their respect was never genuine. It was conditional, dependent on status, dependent on power, dependent on wealth. The kind of respect that disappears when circumstances change. The kind that was never worth having. The attorney's voice pulled her back to the present. Based on our findings, employment reviews have been completed. Several folders were distributed, one by one, across the room. Final decisions, official notices, recommendations approved by the board. Ava turned around. Every eye immediately focused on her. The company belongs to thousands of hardworking employees. Her voice was calm but firm. They deserve opportunities based on merit. Nobody disagreed. They deserve leaders who earn their positions. Several executives nodded. And they deserve protection from those who believe the rules apply only to everyone else. The statement landed heavily, especially on Ethan, because he knew she was right. For years he believed success made him untouchable. For years he assumed consequences were something that happened to other people. Today reality proved otherwise. A board member finally spoke. The recommendations have been unanimously approved. The room fell silent. Unanimously. Not one vote against. Not one supporter. Not one ally willing to stand beside him. Ethan felt completely alone. Then the attorney read the names. Several Mercer family members would be terminated. Others would face immediate review. Additional investigations were already underway. The decisions were final. No appeals. No exceptions. No special treatment. The very privileges Ethan had abused were now being stripped away. One after another. Like dominoes falling. Ava watched him carefully. She saw the shock, the regret, the fear, but she also saw something else. Understanding. For the first time, he truly understood the cost of his actions. Not just to himself, to everyone connected to him. And this was still only the beginning. Because while the boardroom was handling corporate consequences, news of Ava's identity was spreading beyond company walls. Across social media, across financial networks, across business publications. The secret billionaire CEO was no longer a secret. And soon, the entire city would learn exactly how the Mercer family had treated the woman who owned the empire they depended on. When that happened, their public humiliation would dwarf anything that occurred inside this room. The storm outside continued to rage. But an even bigger storm was just beginning. By late afternoon, the story had exploded across the country. Financial news networks interrupted regular programming. Business websites published special reports. Social media platforms flooded with headlines. The mystery owner of Qatar Global Airways had finally been revealed. And people could not stop talking about it. Reporters rushed to uncover every detail they could find. The public was fascinated by the story of the billionaire CEO who had quietly lived as an ordinary woman while overseeing one of the most successful airline companies in the industry. But the attention did not stop there. As journalists dug deeper, another story began emerging. A far uglier one. The story of the husband who divorced her, the mother-in-law who humiliated her, and the mistress who mocked her publicly just hours before the truth came out. The internet was ruthless. Screenshots circulated. Witnesses from the banquet shared accounts of what they had seen. Employees discussed years of favoritism and arrogance within the company. Public opinion shifted rapidly. The Mercer family's reputation began collapsing in real time. Margaret first learned something was wrong when her phone started ringing non-stop. At first, she ignored it. Then she noticed dozens of messages. Missed calls, news alerts, social media notifications. Her confidence disappeared the moment she opened the first article. The color drained from her face. No. Her voice trembled. She opened another report. Then another. Then another. Each one repeated the same devastating truth. Ava was the owner. Ava was the billionaire CEO. Ava controlled the airline. Margaret's hands shook violently. The memories flooded back. Every insult, every cruel remark, every humiliation she had inflicted. The wine, the laughter, the banquet. Suddenly, those moments no longer felt victorious. They felt catastrophic. Across from her, Vanessa stared at her own phone in horror. The comments online were merciless. People were identifying her role in the scandal. Photos from the banquet had already spread everywhere. Thousands of strangers were criticizing her behavior. Several professional contacts had already stopped responding to her messages. The consequences were arriving faster than either woman imagined possible. Meanwhile, Ethan remained inside the nearly empty headquarters building. Most executives had already left. The board meeting had ended hours ago. Yet he remained seated alone in a conference room, staring at nothing. His termination paperwork rested untouched on the table. His entire life felt unreal. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. The day he proposed to Ava. He remembered how happy she looked, how hopeful, how sincere. She had never cared about money, never cared about status. She simply loved him. The realization cut deeper than any punishment. Because for the first time, he understood exactly what he had destroyed. Not a marriage, not a career, something far rarer. Someone who genuinely believed in him. Someone who saw potential in him before anyone else did. And he had thrown it away. Not because she failed him. Because greed convinced him he deserved more. The irony was almost unbearable. He had abandoned a billionaire for someone he believed would improve his future. Now he had neither. As evening approached, Ava stood inside her father's old office. The same office that had remained untouched since since his passing. The city lights glowed outside the windows. The storm had finally begun to fade. On the desk sat a framed photograph. Her father smiling beside the airline's first aircraft decades earlier. Ava picked up the photograph. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel everything she had kept buried. The heartbreak, the disappointment, the loneliness, the betrayal. It would have been easy to seek revenge. Easy to make the Mercers suffer. Easy to destroy them completely. But that wasn't why she had acted. She had acted because leadership required accountability. Because allowing corruption to continue would have harmed thousands of innocent employees. Because protecting the company mattered more than protecting people who betrayed her. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. One of her advisors entered. "The media is requesting interviews." Ava smiled faintly. "Not tonight." The advisor nodded. "There is one more thing." He handed her a folder. Inside were resignation letters, additional reports, and one final document. A formal request from Ethan Mercer asking for a private meeting. Ava stared at the page. Several emotions crossed her face, then disappeared. The advisor waited. Should I decline it? Ava looked out at the city. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she closed the folder. No. The advisor looked surprised. You'll meet with him. Ava nodded slowly. One final conversation. Because there were still words left unsaid. Questions left unanswered. And truths Ethan needed to hear. But neither of them understood that their final meeting would change everything one last time. Because Ava had one final revelation. One final decision. And when she revealed it, the Mercer family's downfall would finally be complete. The following evening, Ethan arrived at the airline headquarters for the last time. The building looked different now. Not because it had changed. Because he had. For years, he walked through those doors believing he belonged among the people running the company. Now he entered as a former employee carrying nothing but regret. The receptionist directed him to the executive floor. The same floor he had always dreamed of reaching permanently. The same floor he would never work on again. As the elevator rose, memories flooded his mind. His first day at the company. His first promotion. The nights Ava waited for him to come home while he stayed late chasing recognition. The arguments. The excuses. The betrayal. By the time the elevator doors opened, his chest felt heavy. An assistant escorted him to Ava's office. When the door opened, he found her standing beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The setting sun painted the skyline in shades of gold and orange. For several seconds, neither spoke. The silence felt strange. Not hostile, just final. Eventually, Ava turned toward him. She looked exactly as she had in the boardroom. Confident, composed, certain of who she was. Ethan lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt ashamed standing in front of her. I don't know where to start, he admitted. Ava remained quiet. Then start with the truth. The words struck harder than any accusation. Because the truth was exactly what he had spent years avoiding. He took a slow breath. I failed you. Ava said nothing. I blamed you for things that weren't your fault. Another pause. I stopped appreciating everything you did. His voice grew weaker. And I betrayed you. The confession hung between them. There was no defense. No excuse. no attempt to justify his actions. For the first time, Ethan was completely honest. Ava listened without interruption. When he finally finished, the room became silent once more. Outside, the last traces of sunlight faded behind the horizon. "I loved you," Ava said quietly. The words caught him off guard. Not because he doubted them, because he suddenly realized how much they once meant. "There was a time I would have done anything for our marriage." A painful lump formed in his throat. Ava continued, "But love cannot survive where respect no longer exists." Ethan closed his eyes. Every word was true. Every word deserved. When he opened them again, Ava had moved to her desk. She opened a drawer and removed a single document. Then she placed it in front of him. Ethan frowned. "What is this?" "A final board resolution." He looked down. His eyes widened. The resolution formally approved all disciplinary actions against the Mercer family. The employment reviews, the terminations, the restructuring. Everything was final. There would be no reversals, no special exceptions, no second chances. His family would have to face the consequences of their own actions, just as he would. Ethan slowly nodded. For once, he didn't argue. For once, he accepted responsibility. Then Ava revealed the final truth. The board wanted criminal investigations. His head snapped upward. They wanted lawsuits. He stared at her. They wanted financial penalties. The room suddenly felt colder. Ava folded her hands. "I refused." Ethan blinked. For a moment, he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. "You refused." Ava nodded. The answer stunned him. After everything that had happened, after all the humiliation, the betrayal, the wine at the banquet, the affair, the divorce, she could have destroyed them completely. Legally, financially, publicly. Instead, she had chosen restraint. Not because they deserved it, because she refused to become the kind of person they had been. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. Not from relief, from shame. Because even now, Ava possessed more grace than anyone who had wronged her, including him. A long silence followed. Then Ava stood. The meeting was over. So was everything else. Ethan understood. There would be no reconciliation, no dramatic reunion, no miraculous second chance. Some mistakes carried permanent consequences. Some doors closed forever. And this was one of them. He slowly rose from his chair. At the doorway, he stopped. For a moment, he looked back. "Ava." She met his gaze. "I'm sorry." The words were simple, late, painfully inadequate, but genuine. Ava nodded. Then she gave him something he never expected. Forgiveness. Not trust. Not another opportunity. Forgiveness. The kind that frees the person giving it. The kind that allows the past to remain in the past. Ethan left without another word. The door closed quietly behind him. And with that sound, an entire chapter of their lives ended. Months later, Qatar Global Airways reached record levels of success. The restructuring strengthened the company. New leadership opportunities opened for deserving employees. Morale improved. Growth accelerated. The future looked brighter than ever. As for the Mercer family, they were forced to rebuild their lives without influence, favoritism, or special treatment. For the first time, they had to earn everything themselves. Some lessons arrive gently. Others arrive through loss. Theirs arrived through both. One spring morning, Ava stood in the airline headquarters, watching a new fleet of aircraft take off into a clear blue sky. The storm that once threatened everything had long since passed. The humiliation at the banquet, the betrayal, the heartbreak, all of it belonged to another life now. She smiled as the aircraft disappeared into the horizon. Her father had once told her something she never forgot. Character is revealed when people believe there will be no consequences. He had been right. The Mercers revealed theirs. And eventually, so did she. The difference was that while they chose arrogance, greed, and cruelty, Ava chose integrity, patience, and strength. In the end, those choices determined everything. The woman they mocked became the leader they could never replace. The empire they tried to use against her remained hers. And the people who believed they had ruined her discovered too late that they had only ruined themselves.